Hey guys, welcome to another synthesis video with the Blofeld here. We're going to be focusing on vocal sounds in this one. So we're not going to do speech synthesis, but we're going to do general vowel sounds that sound something like this. So let's get started. Alright, before we jump right into the Blofeld here, let's quickly describe the kind of thing we're trying to do here, get some basic theory out of the way. So let's talk about the vocal tract, which is what we're kind of trying to emulate here. So if you speak general vowel sounds and you look at the spectrogram of it, you'll see effectively two narrow bands of frequencies that get emphasized, and these are called formants. And you may have heard something called a formant filter, usually associated with vocal sounds. But a formant in general is just a term to describe emphasis of frequencies in a spectrum. In order to simulate those two frequencies on a synthesizer, we effectively need a way to isolate frequencies from a rich set of harmonics. And we're going to do that using something called a bandpass filter. So a bandpass filter is similar to a low-pass filter, which lets through frequencies at the low frequencies and attenuates the high frequencies. The bandpass filter works on a specific small range of frequencies. So it'll let a small gap or small band of frequencies through and attenuate the rest. And since we have two formants, we'll use two bandpass filters to simulate those two. And if you look up formant on Wikipedia, I believe they have a little table there with all the different vowel sounds and what the general frequencies are for the first and second formants. But generally, they're roughly around 1,000 hertz. So we're just going to play around in that area. All right, let's get started. So I've initialized the basic patch. We just have a sawtooth wave. I'm going to switch this over to a pulse wave, and we're going to narrow down the width of the pulse to get a more nasally sound, which will more closely approximate the human voice. So we're just going to use one oscillator for now. I'm going to go here, set my pulse wave, and move the pulse width all the way down. All right, the next thing to do is set our two filters. So first filter, I'm going to go change the type to bandpass. And we're going to pick 24 dBs, which will give us a more steep slope, which will cut off the frequencies a little more strongly. Second filter, again, I'm going to pick the same thing. Bandpass 24. Key thing is just finding the places where we place these two filters. So you can see the first one and the second one I can move down here. Roughly, they're all generally around 1K. So we're just going to start in a ballpark here. My first filter, I'm going to put it slightly below. That's maybe around 800 hertz. And a second one a little above, maybe around 1200 hertz. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot is that since these two filters are routed in parallel, we want to make sure that our oscillator is center routed so that it's equally going through both filters. And now we can play around with our two frequencies. And you can already hear that kind of wow wow sound. And similar for the other one. It's not going to sound anything like a voice right now. So the real trick is going to be massaging the envelopes. Effectively, what we're going to do is assign an envelope to modulate both cutoff frequencies. To keep it simple for now, we're just going to use a filter envelope for both. So I'm going to go into my mod matrix and kind of predefine that filter envelope for cutoff 1. And then in my second modulation slot, I'll do filter envelope for cutoff 2. All right, so for the first one, we can increase the amount. We're generally going to go for a slightly slow attack and a slightly slow delay. So you don't want it to be too punchy on either end because that doesn't give you a realistic sound. I find that the most realistic kind of vowel sound you can get is if you find a sweet spot between like a A-U-L, that kind of like path that goes slowly up, slowly down. And again, we're just going to do broad strokes to start off with, and then we're going to go back and fine tune. But for now, you just want to kind of get a ballpark going. So let's go back to our matrix. So now we've enabled filter 1 modulation, and our second one is filter 2 modulation. This I'm going to go negative so that it brings it down the opposite direction. And then we can go and massage the second filter frequency. You can also increase the resonance to emphasize the frequency more. Then we can go massage the envelope generator. Again, it's going to be a lot of back and forth. We're just fine-tuning the frequencies of the filters and then fine-tuning the amp envelope, or the filter envelope in this case. And you can hear if you make the filter or the attack too short, you kind of lose that realism because you get that super punchy sound, which doesn't really happen with voice. And then we can also change our amp envelope, which is right now quick attack, full sustain. So we can lower the attack of the amp envelope as well to get a more realistic attack. And then we can go back and massage the modulation amount for both of these. And you're just kind of playing it by ear. Once you know which parameters to tweak, there's no kind of set values. You're just kind of going back and forth and massaging and using your ears. There's a very narrow sweet spot for all the parameters. You just got to be patient. And don't be afraid to nudge things up by 1 or 2 values at a time, because it can actually make a big difference. You can just experiment, like see what it sounds like if you crank the resonance too high. And this is a good way to learn synthesis in general, is once you know the general approach, don't be afraid to take values to extremes and kind of learn by experimenting. So right now I've cranked the resonance too high, and now I know that that's probably not a great sound because you get too much of that liquidy. Like it sounds too much like a synth and less like a voice. Let's try resonance all the way down for both, see what that sounds like. I feel like a little bit of resonance helps. So again, it's all about sweet spots and kind of fine tuning. And now we can mess around with the cutoff frequencies, experiment. What does that sound like if it goes too low? Now you see you lose that effect. You really want to stick to that general 1K range. So now we're getting a more kind of high pitch. And then we can go into our effects, add some reverb. And let's go to our matrix and try to assign an LFO to one of the cutoff frequencies. And again, don't be afraid to experiment. I mean, if it sounds like crap, just turn it off. It's no big deal. Then at least you'll learn for next time to what works and what doesn't. First LFO to filter 1 cutoff. See if that sounds any good. Right now it sounds like crap, but let's bring the wave or the speed down. That sounds pretty cool. It gives you kind of a little more variation. LFO2 to control the second cutoff frequency, for example, and we'll set a slightly different rate. I like to set extreme values at the beginning just to hear the effect and then kind of tone it down and manipulate it. We can set a really slow rate, that way you get really subtle variations. Then we can turn on the arpeggiator and see if we can get some interesting. Let's set a slightly longer gate length so that we can hear the envelopes opening up. And we can go back and massage our filter. This way our hands are free to experiment with patching. And then we can even add a second oscillator. Another thing you can try is adding a bit of noise too, because there's always a little breath coming out, which will give you more of a whisper type of tone as well. And then we can try changing the oscillator to even a wavetable, or let's experiment with different waves. You can see that the wave drastically has an effect on the realism here. I find that a thin pulse width usually yields the best results. There's even some formant wavetables here, so we can sort of double the effect. So that sounds pretty cool. Even though we're kind of moving away from the vocal sounds, you still get a really interesting timbres. So here's our formant vocal wavetable. So we got the 2 formant bandpass filters as well as a wavetable that is sort of designed to sound like a voice. Actually, let's reduce that noise. I don't think it's adding too much here. Maybe a little noise. Oh, I forgot to run the noise through both filters. Maybe that's why it wasn't that good. I'm going to use that same filter envelope to modulate the pulse width of the first oscillator. Let's go back to our effects, see if we can add that triple effect. Spice things up a little bit. And then we can add one of the third oscillator just to beef up the sound a little bit. Alright, I'm going to leave it at that. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to approach general vocal synthesis. So we're not actually doing speech synthesis, but we're just going for general vocal-ish vowel sounds. Even if you fail and miss your mark, you still end up in pretty interesting territory. As you've seen, we can go for sounds that don't necessarily sound vocal, but that have an interesting character. And if you like this kind of stuff, make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date, and I'll see you guys in the next one.